The morning sun had barely risen when the sound of splintering wood echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac. Daniel rushed to his window, his heart pounding. His front gate, custom built by his late father, now lay in pieces on the ground. Standing proudly over the wreckage were three men in dark uniforms with HOA security stitched on their jackets. "Violation notice," one barked, tossing a paper toward the porch. "This gate doesn't meet HOA standards. We're here to remove it." Daniel's fists tightened at his sides. He had lived in the neighborhood for 5 years and never once received a complaint. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some whispering, others shaking their heads. Nobody dared intervene. But Daniel saw what others didn't. Their badges were plastic, their uniforms uneven. These weren't real officers. They were imposters. He stepped outside calmly, his gaze steady. "You've just broken private." "Property," he said, voice low but powerful. The men smirked, clearly used to scaring people into silence. "Rules are rules," one sneered. "Karen said this gate is gone, so it's gone." Daniel's lips curled into the faintest smile. They didn't know who they were dealing with, for behind his quiet demeanor lay a truth Karen and her fake enforcers could never have imagined. Daniel wasn't just a homeowner. He was the head of the Secret Service. And he had just been challenged on his own front lawn. Karen arrived. Moments later, strutting down the sidewalk as though she owned it. Her sunglasses flashed in the morning light, and her voice carried over the whispers of neighbors gathering nearby. "Finally," she said with satisfaction, "someone listened to me. That gate was an eyesore, Daniel. The HOA has standards, and I won't let one stubborn homeowner drag us down." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. The men beside her puffed their chests, enjoying the attention. They wore belts with toy-like radios and shiny badges that wouldn't fool a trained eye. To everyone else, though, they looked official enough. "You sent untrained imposters to break into private property," Daniel said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "That's not enforcement. That's trespassing." Karen laughed, dismissing him with a wave. "Call it whatever you want. I run this neighborhood. You either comply or you get fined into the ground." The neighbors shifted, some nodding in silent sympathy, others afraid to breathe too loudly. For years, Karen's intimidation had worked. But this time, her target wasn't another passive. Homeowner. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You've made 2 mistakes. 1, thinking this gate is yours to control, and 2, his eyes locked with hers, sharp and unwavering. Not knowing who you're talking to." Karen's smirk faltered. For the first time, a crack appeared in her confidence. She had no idea that the quiet man she'd tried to humiliate protected. World leaders for a living. And soon the entire neighborhood would find out. The fake HOA cops continued posturing, leaning against their truck as though waiting for applause. Daniel studied every detail, the mismatched patches, the nervous glances, the cheap knockoff equipment. He had spent decades identifying threats before they ever reached the public eye. These 3 were nothing more than bullies in costume. "Sir, you'll need to vacate the property," one of them said, fumbling through a rehearsed line. "This is official HOA business." Daniel's calm smile returned. "Official? Then, you won't mind if I verify your credentials." He pulled out his phone, not to dial 911, but to call a direct line known only to those at the highest levels of government. The men froze, their swagger collapsing in an instant. Even Karen shifted uncomfortably, sensing her grip slipping. "Credentials," Daniel repeated. His voice wasn't raised, but the authority in it was undeniable. One of the men stammered. Another looked to Karen for help, but Karen stayed silent, her confidence draining as neighbors stepped closer, whispering louder now. The curtain of fear she had always relied on was thinning. "You wanted attention, Karen," Daniel said softly. "Now you have it." And with that, 3 black SUVs turned the corner, pulling up in unison. Their tinted windows reflected the stunned faces of everyone on the block. Karen's mouth fell open. She thought she had cornered Daniel. Instead, she had triggered the arrival of the real thing. The SUVs stopped with precision, doors opening in perfect sync. Men and women in sharp suits stepped out, earpieces glinting in the sun. Their presence was controlled, quiet, but commanding. The crowd gasped. Neighbors who once hid behind curtains now stepped forward, curiosity overtaking fear. The fake officers shrank back, their bravado evaporating under the gaze of professionals who carried themselves with effortless authority. One agent approached Daniel, addressing him respectfully. "Director, are you all right?" Karen blinked in disbelief. Director? She had thought Daniel was just another homeowner, another target for her endless rules. But now, the truth was revealed in front of everyone. Daniel nodded calmly. "I'm fine, but these gentlemen seem to think they represent the law." He gestured toward the imposters who now looked like children caught in a lie. The agent's eyes narrowed. "Understood." Karen tried to recover, stepping forward. "Wait, this isn't what it looks like. They're volunteers, just helping enforce community standards." Her voice wavered, her usual arrogance fading into desperation. Daniel's expression softened, but his words cut sharp. "Karen, leadership isn't about control. It's about service. You've forgotten that." The neighbors listened intently, their loyalty shifting. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one commanding the stage. And in that silence, Daniel knew. Her reign over the community was beginning to crumble. The imposters were escorted to the side, their plastic badges confiscated. The agents didn't need raised voices or force. The quiet professionalism was more than enough. Neighbors began speaking up, their courage fueled by what they had just witnessed. "She fined me for leaving my trash can out 10 minutes too long," one said bitterly. Another added, "She threatened to tow my car for parking in my own driveway." The stories poured out, years of frustration bubbling to the surface. Karen stood frozen, her face pale as the very people she claimed to represent turned against her. Ethan, Daniel's teenage son, watched in awe. He had always known his father was disciplined and calm, but seeing him expose truth with such quiet power left him speechless. Daniel raised his hand, silencing the crowd, not with authority, but with respect. "This neighborhood isn't a dictatorship," he said. "It's a community, and a community thrives on trust, not fear." The words sank in, carried by the calm strength in his tone. People nodded, some even clapping softly. Karen's shoulders slumped. For the first time, she had no script, no rule book to hide behind. Her empire was cracking, and it wasn't Daniel who destroyed it. It was the neighbors she had silenced for years, now finding their voices. An emergency HOA meeting was called that very evening. The clubhouse overflowed with residents, their voices buzzing with energy. No one had ever seen a turnout this large. Proof that the day's events had lit a fire. Karen sat at the head table, her composure fraying. She launched into her usual speech about standards and order, but the room no longer echoed with silence. This time, people spoke back. "You called fake cops to break a man's property," one neighbor said sharply. "You've abused your power for years," another added. "We're done being afraid." Karen's pleas grew more desperate, her authority unraveling with each word. Finally, the board announced a vote of no confidence. Slips of paper passed from hand to hand, pens scratching. Daniel sat quietly in the back, his presence steady but unobtrusive. He wasn't here to claim power, only to restore fairness. When the count was revealed, the decision was overwhelming. Karen was removed. The room erupted in applause, not for vengeance, but for freedom. Karen stormed out, muttering under her breath, but her influence was gone. For the first time in years, the neighborhood breathed again. Days later, the broken gate was repaired, not by contractors, but by neighbors who came together, offering tools, paint, and helping hands. What had once been a symbol of Karen's control was now a symbol of unity. Daniel stood beside his son, watching the community laugh and work together. Children played nearby, the air lighter, freer. Ethan looked up at his father. "You didn't even raise your voice, Dad. How did you beat her?" Daniel smiled, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "True strength doesn't need to shout. It stands firm, even in silence." Ethan nodded slowly, the lesson sinking deep. His father hadn't just defended their home. He had reminded the neighborhood what it meant to belong. As the sun dipped behind the rooftop's golden light. Bathing the freshly mended gate, Daniel felt peace. His work protecting the nation was important, but today protecting his community meant just as much. Karen's shadow was gone, and in its place stood something stronger. Trust, respect, and unity. And though no one in the neighborhood would ever forget that day, they all agreed on one truth. Real power had never been in the HOA's rules. It had always been in the hands of those who stood together.